little fox.
Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 15, A Queen's Girl. The next 3 weeks at Green Gables were busy as Anne got ready to go to Queen's College. Anne had many lovely clothes to take. It was Matthew who bought Anne's clothes, and Marilla no longer objected. Anne put on her new green silk dress and recited a poem for Matthew and Marilla in the kitchen. Marilla watched Anne's bright, animated face and graceful movements. A tear came to Marilla's eye.
"My poem made you cry, Marilla?"
Anne exclaimed.
"No, I wasn't crying over that."
Marilla sniffed.
"I was thinking of the little girl you used to be, Anne. I wish you had stayed a little girl. You've grown up now, and you're going away to college. You look so tall and stylish and so different in that dress. I just get lonely thinking about it."
"Marilla,"
Anne took Marilla's hands and looked tenderly into Marilla's eyes.
"I haven't changed, not really. The real me, back here, is just the same. I will always be your little Anne, who will love you and Matthew and dear Green Gables every day of her life."
Matthew listened, and with suspicious moisture in his eyes, he got up and went outside.
"Well, now, I guess she hasn't been spoiled,"
Matthew said to himself proudly.
"I guess interfering sometimes never did any harm either. She's smart, pretty, and loving, too. She's been a blessing to us. It was a lucky mistake that Mrs. Spencer made, but I don't believe it was luck. No, I believe Anne was sent as a gift from heaven because we needed her."
The day came for Anne to go to college. After many tearful goodbyes, Anne's life as a college student began. On the first day at Queen's, students met each other and their professors. Afterwards, Anne left the college and went to her boarding house. She looked dismally at her little room, with its pictureless walls and empty bookcase. A tear came into her eye as she thought of Green Gables. Anne started to cry, and a flood of tears would have come if Josie Pye had not appeared at Anne's door. In the joy of seeing a familiar face, Anne forgot that she and Josie were not good friends, to say the least.
"I'm glad you came,"
Anne said sincerely. "You've been crying," Josie remarked. "I suppose you're homesick. Some people have no self-control. You really shouldn't cry because your nose and eyes get red, and then you seem red all over." With that, Josie left. Anne scowled and cried again. Soon, Anne's homesickness subsided. She threw herself into her studies and made new friends. She decided to try for the academic awards, the gold medal for the best student in general, and a scholarship to Redmond University for the best student in English.
"I'll win that scholarship if hard work can do it,"
she thought.
"Wouldn't Matthew be proud if I got a BA?"
After the Christmas holidays, the students settled down to hard work. By this time, the medal contestants were narrowed down to 3, Gilbert Blythe, Anne Shirley, and Lewis Wilson. The scholarship was more doubtful, with any one of 6 students being a possible winner. Anne's rivalry with Gilbert was as intense as ever, but for some reason, the bitterness had gone out of it. Spring came, but at Queen's there was talk only of exams.
"Ruby, sometimes I feel like exams mean everything. But when I look at the flowers blossoming, the exams don't seem as important,"
said Anne. Ruby Gillis did not share this view. To her, exams were very important, far more important than flowers. Besides, Anne was sure to pass all her exams, while Ruby was not so certain. It was the morning the exam results were to be posted on the notice board at Queen's College. Anne and Jane Andrews walked down the street together. Jane was smiling and happy. Exams were over, and she had passed at least. Anne was pale and quiet. In 10 minutes, she would know who had won the medal and the scholarship.
"I don't have the courage to march up to that notice board, Jane,"
Anne said.
"You must read it and tell me, and try to do it as quickly as possible. If I failed, just tell me, and whatever you do, don't try to sympathize with me. Promise me, Jane."
Jane promised solemnly, but as it happened, there was no need for such a promise. Anne and Jane found a group of boys carrying Gilbert Blythe on their shoulders and yelling,
Hooray for Gilbert! Medalist!
Anne felt a pang of defeat and disappointment. So Gilbert had won. Well, Matthew would be sorry. He had been so sure she would win. And then somebody called out,
3 cheers for Anne Shirley, winner of the scholarship!
Suddenly, many students were around them, and Anne was the center of a laughing, congratulating group. She was pushed and pulled and hugged, but she managed to whisper to Jane,
Oh, won't Matthew and Marilla be pleased? I must write home right away.
After the scholarship and medal ceremony, Anne went home to Avonlea with Matthew and Marilla. Diana was at Green Gables to greet her.
It's so good to be home again.
Cried Anne.
And it's good to see you. I have so many things to tell you, but now I'm tired of being studious. I'll spend 2 hours tomorrow lying on the grass, thinking of absolutely nothing.
You've done so well, Anne, said Diana. I suppose you won't be teaching now that you've won the scholarship?
No, I won't,
said Anne.
I'll go to the Redmond University in September.
Jane's going to teach in Newbridge, said Diana, and Gilbert is going to teach too. He must. His father can't afford to send him to college next year, so he will work instead and save up the money for it. Anne felt a little dismayed. She had expected Gilbert to go to Redmond University as well. What would she do without their rivalry to inspire her? And what would she do without her friends from Avonlea? Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 16, A Bend in the Road. The next morning, Anne realized that Matthew was not looking well. After he had left, Anne said,
Marilla, is Matthew well?
No,
said Marilla in a troubled tone.
his heart has been quite bad this spring, but he keeps working. Maybe he'll rest now that you're home. You always cheer him up.
Anne looked at Marilla.
You're not looking well yourself, Marilla. You must rest now that I'm home.
Marilla smiled affectionately at her girl.
It's not the work, it's my eyes. I'm seeing an optometrist soon.
In the evening, Anne went to see Matthew in the fields. Matthew walked slowly with his head down.
You've been working too hard, Matthew,
She said reproachfully.
I forget I'm getting older.
Matthew replied.
If I'd been the boy you'd sent for,
Said Anne.
I could help you.
Anne, I'd rather have you than a dozen boys. It wasn't a boy who got that scholarship. It was a girl, my girl, whom I'm proud of.
Later that night, Anne remembered Matthew's words. It was the last night before sorrow touched Anne's life, and no life is quite the same afterward.
Matthew, what is the matter?
It was Marilla who spoke, holding Matthew's head. Anne burst through the door.
He's fainted.
Gasped Marilla.
Anne, run for Martin, quick!
Martin was the hired man, and he drove to get the doctor, stopping at the Lynde's house to tell them the news. Mrs. Lynde came as quickly as she could. She pushed Anne and Marilla gently aside, and then laid her ear on Matthew's heart. She looked at their anxious faces sorrowfully. "Oh, Marilla," she said gravely, "I don't think we can do anything for him." Anne spoke quietly.
Mrs. Lynde, you don't think Matthew is...
Anne could not say the dreadful word. She turned sick and pale. The doctor said Matthew's death had been painless. The news spread quickly through Avonlea, and all day friends and neighbors came to pay their respects. That night the house was quiet. Matthew's death left a horrible ache. When Anne sobbed, Marilla came to comfort her.
What will we do without him?
Anne cried.
We've got each other, Anne.
Marilla said softly.
I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here, if you'd never come.
Slowly life went on, and work was done as before. Anne, new to grief, thought this was sad, that they could go on in the old way without Matthew. She felt almost ashamed that she could feel happy again. She missed him so much, and yet the world still seemed beautiful. But Mrs. Lynde assured her, "Matthew would want you to be happy, Anne. He liked to hear you laugh."
I saw Gilbert Blythe today.
Marilla said one afternoon.
What a nice-looking fellow he is,
She went on.
He's so tall and manly. He looks a lot like his father did at the same age. We used to be very good friends. People called him my boyfriend.
Anne looked up with interest.
Oh, Marilla, what happened?
We had a fight.
Marilla said.
I wouldn't forgive him right away. I wanted to punish him first. He never came back. The Blythes were very independent, but I've always wished I'd forgiven him when I had the chance.
So you've had a bit of romance in your life, too,
said Anne softly.
Yes, I guess. You wouldn't know from looking at me, but you can never tell people from their outsides.
The next day, Anne came home to find Marilla looking dejected.
Are you tired, Marilla?
Yes, no, I don't know,
said Marilla wearily.
It's not that.
Did you see the optometrist?
Asked Anne anxiously.
Yes, I saw him,
said Marilla.
He said if I wear glasses and stop reading and sewing, my eyes will be all right. But if I don't, I'll be blind in 6 months. Blind! And just think of it.
Things have changed so much since I came home,
Anne thought sadly.
Yes, I saw him,
said Marilla.
He said if I wear glasses and stop reading and sewing, my eyes will be all right. But if I don't, I'll be blind in 6 months. Blind! And just think of it.
Things have changed so much since I came home,
Anne thought sadly. One afternoon, a few days later, Marilla came in from the yard. She had been talking to a man named Mr. Sadler. There were tears in Marilla's eyes, and her voice broke as she told Anne,
He heard I was going to sell Green Gables, and he wants to buy it.
Buy Green Gables?
Anne burst out.
Marilla, are you selling Green Gables?
If my eyes were strong, I could stay here. But I may lose my sight, and I can't stay here alone. Mrs. Lynde advised me to sell and stay with her. I'm sorry you won't have a home to come to on vacation.
Marilla broke down and wept bitterly.
You mustn't sell Green Gables,
said Anne firmly.
And you won't stay here alone, Marilla. I'll be with you.
Marilla looked at Anne.
What do you mean?
I'm not taking the scholarship. I couldn't leave you after all you've done for me. The Avonlea School is promised to Gilbert Blythe, but I can teach in Carmody. I won't leave you, Marilla.
Marilla was stunned.
But I can't let you sacrifice your education for me.
Nonsense! There is no sacrifice!
Anne laughed.
Nothing could be worse than giving up Green Gables. I'll be a good teacher and save your eyesight. Besides, I'll study college courses at home.
I feel as if you've given me a new life,
Marilla said, beaming. In Avonlea, people heard that Anne had given up the idea of going to university, and not knowing about Marilla's eyes thought she was foolish. But Mrs. Lynde told Anne, I'm glad to hear you're not going, Anne. I don't believe in women going to university.
But I'll teach at Carmody and study Latin and Greek at home, Mrs. Lynde,
said Anne, laughing. The school board gave you Avonlea School, Mrs. Lynde said. Anne jumped to her feet.
I thought they promised it to Gilbert Blythe.
They did. But when Gilbert heard you applied, he withdrew his application and suggested you for the job. He is going to teach at White Sands. Wasn't that kind and thoughtful of him?
Gilbert did that for me?
Anne murmured. At dusk, Anne went to the little Avonlea graveyard and put fresh flowers on Matthew's grave. She lingered there, liking the peace of the place. A tall man came toward her, whistling.
Gilbert,
Anne said, her cheeks flushed.
Thank you for giving up the school for me.
Gilbert took her hand eagerly.
That's all right, Anne. Are we going to be friends after this? Have you really forgiven me?
Anne laughed.
I forgave you the day you rescued me from the brook, although I didn't know it.
When Anne came home later, Marilla asked curiously,
Who was with you, Anne?
Gilbert Blythe.
answered Anne, blushing.
He walked with me.
I didn't think you two were such good friends.
Marilla smiled,
We've been good enemies,
said Anne.
but it's more sensible to be friends.
Anne sat at her window that night, content. Green Gables was her home, and the dreams of a little red-headed orphan girl had come true.